Good evening, my peaceful travellers. Tonight we step into a world stripped of everything familiar. No electric blankets, no thermostats, no insulated walls keeping winter at arm's length. You find yourself standing at the threshold of an early American winter where the cold doesn't just chill your skin, it tests whether you truly understand what survival means. The wind already pulls at your clothing, and the first sensation that registers is how completely unprepared modern life has left you for this moment. You take that truth in slowly. Without the knowledge these settlers carried, you wouldn't last 3 days in what they called home for 6 months. So before we begin, if you're finding value in these stories, consider liking this video and subscribing if the content resonates with you. And as you settle into your evening, share your time zone and location in the comments below. Now soften the lights around you, let the modern world fade, and follow me into a different kind of cold. The frontier awaits, the storm is building, and the first shelter stands just ahead, barely visible through the swirling white. These pioneers you're about to encounter lived lives that would break most modern people within a week. Their days began before dawn, when frost still coated the inside of their cabin walls like crystalline wallpaper. They rose from beds they'd shared with entire families, pressed together not from choice, but from the simple mathematics of survival. More bodies meant more warmth. Breakfast, if it came at all, might be nothing more than cornmeal mush, or yesterday's bread softened in whatever liquid could be spared. Their work was relentless and seasonal. Men spent winter days chopping firewood until their hands bled through worn gloves, knowing that stopping meant freezing. They checked trap lines through snow that buried fence posts, hunted in conditions that made every step a gamble, and repaired damage to buildings that the cold systematically destroyed each night. Women worked equally hard inside the cabins, cooking over fires that had to be maintained constantly, mending clothing by whatever light they could capture, and stretching impossibly meager provisions across months that seemed designed to starve families slowly. Children learned early that winter was not for playing. They hauled water from streams or wells that fought to freeze solid, gathered kindling with small hands that went numb within minutes, and watched younger siblings while parents worked at the edge of exhaustion. There were no snow days, no warm cocoa waiting inside, no rescue if things went wrong. The nearest neighbour might be miles away across impassable drifts. The nearest doctor might be weeks of travel distant, assuming travel was even possible. This was life stripped to its essentials: shelter, warmth, food, and the stubborn refusal to surrender to a landscape that seemed determined to prove humans didn't belong here. Everything else was luxury they couldn't afford. You take your first steps across frozen ground that crunches beneath your boots like breaking glass. The snow here doesn't fall gently. It drives horizontally, carried by winds that seem to have their own angry purpose. You pull your collar higher, feeling the fabric already stiffening as moisture freezes. The landscape ahead offers little comfort. A few rough structures dot the white expanse, each one hunched against the weather like an exhausted traveller. You move toward the nearest one, understanding with each breath that your modern instincts mean nothing here. The cold is already finding every gap in your clothing, every exposed inch of skin, every vulnerable moment when you breathe too deeply. A historical reality settles over you as you walk. Early American settlers frequently arrived at their homesteads in autumn, leaving them mere weeks to prepare for winters that lasted half the year. Rivers froze solid, snow accumulated to depths that buried doorways, and temperatures dropped to levels that made even the simplest tasks dangerous. You feel that truth in the air around you now. Winter here wasn't a season. It was an adversary that demanded constant vigilance. The wind shifts and you catch your first clear view of a dwelling ahead. The logs are stacked unevenly, gaps visible between them even from this distance. You approach and notice something peculiar tucked into one of those spaces. Moss, dried grass, even what looks like strips of old cloth. You reach out and touch one of these makeshift plugs. It crumbles slightly under your glove, releasing a faint, earthy scent. This was chinking, the desperate art of filling every crack before the cold found its way inside. You run your fingers along the wall and realize that nearly every seam shows evidence of this work. Someone spent hours, maybe days, pressing material into gaps while racing against dropping temperatures. Before you enter, a small detail from frontier correspondence comes to mind. Some families believed that packing moss with pine resin created a seal blessed by the forest itself. Whether superstition or practical wisdom born from trial and error, the practice spread across settlements. You can almost picture hands working quickly, fingers numbing, breath visible, determination overriding discomfort as they fought to make these walls solid enough to matter. You push the door open. It resists at first, ice has formed along the frame, but gives way with a sharp crack. Inside, the temperature drops your expectations another degree. This shelter offers protection from wind, yes, but warmth? That's something earned through different means entirely. The floor is hard-packed earth, frozen now into something resembling stone. In the center sits a circle of rocks arranged around a shallow depression. No fire burns there currently. Only ash remains, grey and lifeless. You kneel and touch the stones. They're cold enough to sting through your gloves. The last warmth left here hours ago, maybe longer. Your eyes adjust to the dimness. Along one wall, you notice a raised platform built from rough planks. On top lies what appears to be bedding, layers of fabric so worn they've lost any original color, blending into shades of grey and brown. You approach and press your hand into the material. It yields slightly, revealing dried plant matter underneath. Cattail down, perhaps, or milkweed fluff gathered before the first snow. Settlers used whatever nature provided to create even the thinnest barrier between their bodies and the cold pressing up from below. You sit on the edge of this sleeping platform, feeling the wood flex slightly under your weight. A mainstream historical fact surfaces in your thoughts. Frontier families often elevated their sleeping areas because ground-level cold could penetrate even the thickest blankets. 6 inches, 12 inches, any distance from the frozen earth helped preserve the warmth their bodies generated. You imagine lying here, wrapped in every piece of clothing you owned, listening to the wind test every crack in the walls. Standing again, you notice small details that speak to the constant battle against cold. A row of pegs along the back wall holds clothing. Coats, stiff with frost, mittens that could stand upright on their own. You lift one of the coats. The weight surprises you. This is wool so thick and heavy it feels like armor. You drape it across your shoulders for a moment, feeling how the fabric holds its shape, even when not worn. Settlers sometimes slept in their coats when temperatures plunged dangerously low, sacrificing comfort for the insulation that might mean the difference between waking and not. Before moving on, an unusual observation from a traveller's journal crosses your mind. One visitor described how frontier children would play a game, guessing which garment froze stiffest overnight. The lightest hearts found ways to make even hardship feel less heavy. You smile softly at the image, then carefully replace the coat on its peg. You step back outside, and the wind immediately reclaims you. Snow has begun to accumulate on your shoulders during your brief time indoors. You brush it away and continue along the narrow path toward another structure barely visible through the white curtain ahead. Each step requires effort now. The drifts have deepened, and your legs work hard to pull free from snow that seems determined to hold you in place. When you reach the next cabin, you find the door partially blocked by a snowdrift that's formed against it like a frozen wave. You dig with your hands, scooping until you've cleared enough space to squeeze through. The drift's interior is surprisingly smooth, almost sculptural. You push inside and immediately notice this shelter feels different, warmer somehow. Not warm by any modern standard, but the air doesn't bite quite as sharply. Then you see why. In the corner, separated by a low partition, two goats huddle together, their bodies pressed close, breath steaming in slow, rhythmic clouds. The scent of animals fills the space, earthy, pungent, alive. You move closer and feel genuine warmth radiating from their bodies. Historical accounts often mention this arrangement. Families shared living quarters with livestock during the harshest months, benefiting from the heat animals naturally produced. It wasn't ideal, but it was practical. Heat was heat, regardless of its source. You walk around the partition and examine the human sleeping area. The bedding here is arranged close to the dividing wall, clearly positioned to capture warmth from the animals. You kneel and place your palm against the partition. Yes, heat passes through the wood, subtle but real. You imagine children sleeping here, backs pressed against this wall, grateful for the gentle warmth that made the difference between shivering and actual rest. A quirky detail from oral histories emerges in your memory. Some settlers swore that goats brought good dreams because their steady breathing created a peaceful rhythm that lulled even anxious minds towards sleep. You listen to the soft sounds from beyond the partition, a gentle rustling, a quiet exhale, and understand how that belief might have formed. In a world where peace was scarce, small comforts took on outsized importance. You rise and continue exploring. On a crude shelf sits several clay vessels, their surfaces stained dark from use. You lift one and peer inside. A residue of something thick coats the bottom, tallow perhaps, or rendered fat saved for winter cooking. Next to the vessels lies a wooden spoon, its handle worn smooth from countless meals stirred over modest fires. These simple objects represent careful preparation. Families rendered animal fat in autumn, storing it for months when fresh food became scarce and every calorie mattered. Before leaving, you pause near the door and glance back at the shared space. The goats shift slightly, their warmth still pulsing gently into the cold air. This cabin represents a truth about frontier survival. Adaptation often meant setting aside preferences in favor of what worked. Dignity and cleanliness mattered less than waking up alive. Outside again, the storm seems to have intensified. Snow no longer falls so much as swirls in chaotic patterns that make direction difficult to judge. You shield your eyes and scan for the next shelter. There, a darker shape emerging from the white. You push toward it, fighting against wind that feels almost personal in its determination to slow your progress. This structure looks older than the others. The logs have weathered to a silver grey, and ice has formed along every horizontal surface like crystalline decorations. You approach the entrance and find it sealed. Not locked, but frozen shut by ice that's accumulated where moisture met wood and temperatures dropped below hope. You push once, twice, then throw your shoulder against it. The ice breaks with a sound like shattering glass, and the door swings inward. The interior holds a peculiar stillness, not peaceful, suspended, as if this place has been waiting through countless winters for someone to witness what it knows. You step carefully across the threshold and your boot knocks against something solid. Looking down, you see a stone, round, smooth, wrapped in what was once cloth but has now stiffened into a fabric shell. You pick it up and feel the stone's weight. It's cold now, but you recognize what this represents. Heated stones were perhaps the most elegant solution to the fireplace problem. Families would heat river rocks in flames until they glowed, then wrap them in layers of cloth and tuck them into beds before sleeping. The stones released warmth slowly throughout the night, creating pockets of comfort in otherwise freezing bedding. You hold this one and imagine it warm. Imagine the relief of pressing cold feet against it. Imagine the gradual spread of heat through layers of blankets. You set it down carefully and notice more stones scattered around the room, 5, 6, 7 of them. A whole family's worth. You picture the evening ritual, children watching as parents selected the smoothest stones from a gathered pile, placing them in themes, rotating them with sticks, until the moment arrived to wrap them quickly and distribute them like precious gifts. A small, charming detail from settler recollections comes to mind. One grandmother wrote about naming her favourite warming stone Old Faithful because it never cracked despite years of heating and cooling cycles. The family passed it through generations, each winter bringing it back into service with quiet gratitude. You smile at the thought. Even simple objects could carry stories when survival depended on them. Walking further into the cabin, you discover a sleeping area arranged with unusual care. The platform is built higher than in the previous dwellings, and the space beneath it is filled with what looks like bundled straw wrapped in sacking. This served dual purposes: storage and insulation. The trapped air in those bundles prevented cold from rising through the platform, while keeping materials dry and accessible. Clever design born from hard-earned experience. You sit on the platform and run your hand across the bedding. Multiple quilts are laid here, each one clearly handmade from whatever fabric could be spared. You lift the top layer and examine the stitching. It's uneven, done by candlelight perhaps, or by fingers too cold to move with precision, but it's sturdy. These weren't quilts made for beauty, they were constructed for survival. with thickness prioritized over pattern. Before continuing your journey, you stand and take in the whole room once more. The wrapped stones, the layered bedding, the insulated platform. Every detail speaks to preparation. Someone spent autumn thinking about winter, gathering materials, making decisions that would matter when the cold arrived in earnest. You feel a quiet respect for that foresight. The door resists when you try to leave. New ice has already formed during your brief time inside. You push harder, and it gives way with that same shattering sound. Wind and snow immediately assault you, and you lower your head, tucking your chin deep into your collar as you set out toward the next destination. Your legs burn with the effort of trudging through deepening drifts. The cold has worked its way through your clothing now, settling into your core. You understand viscerally why settlers wrote about winter as if it were a living entity, something with intent, with persistence, with the patience to wait for the moment when your guard dropped. The next cabin appears suddenly, closer than you expected. You nearly stumble into it. The structure is small, barely larger than a modern garden shed, and its roof sags under accumulated snow. You brush the door clear and enter. What strikes you immediately is the smell. Herbs. Dried sage, perhaps mint, maybe something else you can't quite identify. You look around and spot bundles hanging from the rafters. Plants gathered before frost killed everything green. In the center of the room sits a clay pot, still positioned over a ring of stones that once held fire. You kneel and peer inside. A residue coats the bottom, something that was boiled here not long ago. You catch a faint scent still clinging to the ceramic. This was for drinking, not eating. Hot water infused with whatever herbs could provide even the illusion of warmth. Settlers created their own versions of tea from pine needles, dried berries, bark, even roots dug before the ground froze solid. A practical detail from frontier medical records comes to mind. Families brewed hot drinks not just for comfort, but as internal warming tools. The liquid carried heat into the body's core, raising temperature from within when external sources failed. Doctors of the time recommended it for preventing winter illnesses, though whether it truly helped or simply provided psychological comfort remains debated by scholars. You find several cups arranged on a small shelf. Each one is different, some clay, some carved wood, one that appears to be fashioned from a section of hollowed horn. You pick up the horn cup and feel its lightness. Settlers used whatever materials they could craft or trade for. Uniformity meant nothing. Function meant everything. As you explore, you notice the sleeping area in this cabin is positioned directly next to where the hot drinks would have been prepared. Smart planning. The rising steam from boiling water would warm the air around the bedding, creating a slightly more hospitable microclimate for sleep. You sit on the rough mattress and imagine the scene. Family members passing cups of weak pine tea, hands wrapping around the warmth, small sips taken slowly to make the heat last as long as possible. An unusual note from a traveling preacher's diary surfaces in your thoughts. He described one family's ritual of sharing a single cup of hot water, each person taking 3 sips before passing it to the next. They called it circle warmth, a practice that bonded them while conserving their limited supply of fuel. You picture that quiet ceremony playing out in this very room, Voices low, movements deliberate. Winter pressing close, but temporarily held at bay. You rise and move toward the door, pausing to touch one of the herb bundles. The leaves crumble slightly under your fingers, releasing a faint scent that feels both ancient and immediate. This cabin represents a different kind of survival wisdom. The knowledge that warmth could be cultivated from unexpected sources, that the body could be fooled into feeling less cold through careful application of what little was available. Outside, the storm continues its relentless performance. You've lost track of how long you've been walking through this frozen landscape. Time behaves differently in constant cold and endless white. You press forward anyway, following some instinct toward the next shelter barely visible ahead. When you reach it, you find something unexpected. This isn't truly a cabin, it's more of a lean-to built against a massive fallen tree. 3 walls exist, but the 4th side is open except for a heavy hide hung like a curtain. You pull the hide aside and duck under. The space inside is cramped but sheltered from the direct wind. Snow has drifted in along one edge, creating a natural slope that actually seems to block some of the cold air. You examine this improvised structure with growing appreciation. Someone created shelter from almost nothing. A fallen tree, some branches for framing, hides stretched across the gaps, snow allowed to drift in strategic locations. It's temporary, perhaps built by travelers caught between destinations when winter struck, but it's functional. A detail from frontier survival guides enters your thoughts. Experienced woodsmen could construct adequate shelter in a matter of hours using only what the landscape provided. They read the land, understood wind patterns, knew which natural formations offered protection. This lean-to demonstrates that knowledge, positioned to use the tree as a windbreak, angled to encourage snow to accumulate where it would help rather than hinder. You sit in the cramped space and listen to the storm outside. Here, protected by hide and log and strategic snow placement, the wind becomes just sound instead of physical assault. You close your eyes and imagine a traveler spending the night in this spot, wrapped in whatever blankets they carried, grateful for even this basic reprieve from exposure. Before moving on, you notice marks carved into the fallen tree's bark, deliberate scratches forming what might be symbols or simply evidence that someone felt the need to mark their presence here. You trace them with your glove, connecting across time with whoever sheltered here before you. Emerging from the lean-to, you face the storm once more, but something has shifted. Whether the wind has truly lessened or you've simply grown more accustomed to its assault, the journey feels slightly less impossible now. You continue forward, boots finding purchase in snow that has packed down along what must be a frequently travelled path. The next dwelling rises from the white landscape like a question mark. Its shape is odd, almost rounded. As you approach, you realize why. This structure has been partially buried in snow, whether intentionally or through accumulated drifts, and the covering has created a kind of insulation. You find the entrance, a low opening that requires you to crouch and crawl inside. The difference is immediate. This space feels warmer, noticeably so. The snow piled against and over the structure acts as insulation, trapping air and creating a buffer between the interior and the killing cold outside. You straighten as much as the low ceiling allows and look around. The bedding here is minimal, just some piled cloth and what appears to be dried grass. but the air itself feels less hostile. A historical fact comes to mind. Some indigenous peoples and later some settlers learned that snow could be an ally when properly understood. Igloos demonstrated this principle perfectly. Snow's insulating properties made it possible to raise interior temperatures significantly above exterior conditions using only body heat. This partially buried cabin represents a similar logic applied to frontier construction. You sit on the grass, bedding, and let yourself feel the relative warmth. It's still cold, still far from comfortable, but the sharp edge has been removed. You imagine sleeping here, the snow above absorbing the worst of the wind's fury, your breath gradually warming the small chamber. It would work. Not perfectly, but well enough. An unusual detail from an explorer's journal comes to mind. He wrote about a settler who intentionally allowed snow to bury his cabin each winter, claiming it wrapped the house like a winter coat. Neighbors thought him mad until they noticed his children coughed less and his woodpile lasted longer than theirs. Sometimes wisdom looked like madness until results proved otherwise. You linger in this space a bit longer than the others, appreciating the respite it offers. Then you crawl back toward the entrance, emerging into the storm with renewed determination. More shelters await, each one teaching different lessons about survival in a landscape that offered no mercy to the unprepared. The journey continues, and as you walk, you feel yourself changing. The cold no longer shocks, it's simply the condition in which you exist. Your breathing has slowed, steadied. Your movements have become more deliberate. You're adapting, just as those early settlers had to adapt, learning the rhythm of winter survival one step at a time. Ahead, another cabin emerges, then another. Each one holds its own story, its own innovations born from necessity, and you move toward them, ready to learn what they have to teach about the long, cold nights when warmth was something earned rather than expected. You approach the next structure with legs that feel heavier than before. The snow has worked its way into your boots somehow, melting slightly against your skin before refreezing into uncomfortable ridges. You understand now why settlers wrote obsessively about keeping feet dry. Wet cold penetrates in ways that dry cold cannot match. Each step reminds you of this fundamental truth. This cabin stands taller than the previous ones, with walls that appear more deliberately constructed. The logs fit together with greater precision, the chinking is more thorough, and the roof shows evidence of multiple repairs layered over time. You push the door open and step into a space that feels almost spacious after the cramped quarters you've been exploring. What catches your attention immediately is the arrangement of sleeping areas. Multiple pallets line the walls, each one separated by a small amount of space, but clearly part of a communal arrangement. This was a gathering place, somewhere multiple families or travelers could shelter together when the storm grew too dangerous for isolation. You walk between the sleeping areas and feel the ghost of shared warmth that once filled this room. A mainstream historical observation surfaces. Frontier communities often designated certain cabins as storm shelters, places where neighbors could congregate when conditions turned life-threatening. The practice saved lives but required trust, strangers sleeping shoulder to shoulder, sharing limited resources, setting aside disputes until the weather broke. You run your hand along one of the pallets and imagine the voices that once filled this space, the whispered conversations that helped pass long hours of waiting. On a table near the center sits evidence of a shared meal. Wooden bowls stacked neatly, a large pot with residue coating its interior, several spoons laid out in a row. You pick up one of the spoons and examine it. The handle is worn smooth, used by many hands over many winters. These communal meals served practical and social purposes, distributing scarce food while reinforcing the bonds that held communities together when isolation threatened to fracture them. A quirky detail from a frontier correspondence comes to mind. One settler described a winter tradition where each family brought one ingredient to the storm shelter, creating what they called surprise stew. Nobody knew what the final result would taste like, but everyone contributed and everyone ate equally. The randomness became part of the ritual, something to laugh about during the darkest months. You set the spoon down and move toward the largest sleeping pallet. It's wide enough for 5 or 6 people easily, built from sturdy planks and covered with multiple layers of blankets that show signs of coming from different households. Each family contributed what they could, a worn quilt here, a hide there, a woven mat underneath. The result is a patchwork of survival, beautiful in its practicality. You sit on the edge and feel the slight depression where bodies once pressed the materials down night after night. The wood creaks softly under your weight. You imagine the scene as darkness fell, adults arranging children in the safest positions, usually the center where warmth concentrated while they took the colder edges. Stories would be told to calm fears. Songs might be hummed softly. And eventually exhaustion would pull everyone into fitful sleep, their combined warmth creating a pocket of survival in the frozen night. Standing again, you notice scratches on the wall above the pallet. Not random marks, but tallies. Someone counted nights here, tracking the passage of a particularly brutal winter. You count the marks, 23. Nearly a month of continuous sheltering. Families unable to return to their own cabins because the storm simply wouldn't break. You try to imagine that kind of endurance and find it difficult. A week seems unbearable. A month feels impossible. Yet clearly they endured. Before leaving this communal space, you walk to the window and peer out through gaps in the shutter. The storm still rages, though perhaps with slightly less fury than before. Or maybe you've simply grown accustomed to its voice. You rest your forehead against the cold wood for a moment, drawing strength from the knowledge that others stood in this exact spot, looked out at similar storms, and found the will to continue. The door closes behind you with a solid thunk, and you're back in the wind. Snow immediately begins accumulating on your shoulders again. You've lost feeling in your fingertips despite the gloves, and your face feels tight where the cold has dried your skin. But you continue walking. More stories wait ahead. The path, if it can still be called that, winds between drifts that have grown tall enough to block your view of what lies beyond them. You navigate by instinct and occasional glimpses of structures when the wind shifts the curtain of white. Then, almost unexpectedly, you find yourself standing before a cabin so small you initially mistake it for a storage shed. You push the door open and have to duck significantly to enter. Inside, the ceiling barely clears your head when standing upright. This is a solitary shelter, built for one person or perhaps a couple at most. Everything is within arm's reach. The sleeping platform, a small shelf holding a few items, a fire pit reduced to its absolute minimum size. This is efficiency born from necessity, with no space wasted on comfort or aesthetics. You examine the sleeping platform and notice it's been constructed with surprising sophistication despite the cabin's crude appearance. The platform doesn't just rest on supports. It's suspended by rope threaded through holes in the frame and tied to ceiling beams. This creates a slight give, almost like a hammock, which would have reduced the transfer of cold from the walls and floor. Someone applied real thought to this design. A detail from frontier innovation records comes to mind. Some settlers experimented with suspended sleeping platforms after noticing that fixed beds against walls became unbearably cold as temperatures dropped. The air gap created by suspension, even just a few inches, made measurable differences in comfort. This tiny cabin represents that experimental thinking, someone trying to solve the cold problem through physics rather than just adding more blankets. You press down on the platform and feel it yield slightly before the ropes catch and hold firm. The bedding here is minimal, a single thick blanket and what appears to be a hide used as a mattress. For one person conserving their own body heat, this might be adequate. For two people, it would be cramped but warmer. You sit carefully, testing the suspended platform's stability, and find it holds steady despite the slight sway. The shelf holds a few personal items: a tin cup, a wooden comb with several teeth missing, a small book wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from moisture. You pick up the book carefully and unwrap it just enough to see the cover. A Bible worn from handling but preserved with obvious care. Many settlers brought few possessions to the frontier, but sacred texts often made the journey regardless of space limitations. This book likely provided spiritual comfort during long nights when physical comfort proved impossible to achieve. You rewrap the book and place it back exactly as you found it. Beside it sits a small pouch. You open it carefully and find flint and steel inside, along with a bit of char cloth. These fire-starting tools would have been precious beyond measure. A family might share bedding or food, but fire-starting materials were often kept close and guarded carefully. Without them, even the smallest warming fire became impossible to create. An unusual note from a trapper's memoir surfaces in your thoughts. He described meeting a solitary settler who kept his flint and steel on a leather cord around his neck, even while sleeping, claiming he'd rather lose a hand than lose the ability to make fire. The intensity of that commitment speaks to how thoroughly cold dominated frontier life during winter months. You stand, as much as the low ceiling allows, and take a final look around this minimal shelter. Everything here is reduced to absolute essentials, yet someone survived in this space, probably survived multiple winters. There's something both humbling and inspiring about that reality. You duck back through the door into the storm. The wind has shifted direction, now coming from your left instead of straight ahead. The change disorients you briefly until you spot another cabin emerging from the white haze. This one lists to one side, as if the winter has been slowly pushing it over for years. You approach cautiously, uncertain if the structure is even safe to enter. The door hangs at an angle, and you have to lift it slightly to open it. Inside, everything slopes. The floor tilts noticeably toward one corner, and the sleeping platform has been built with one end higher than the other to compensate. It's disorienting at first, your sense of level wars with what your eyes perceive. But you step carefully inside and let the door fall closed behind you. This cabin tells a story of adaptation to failure. The structure began settling or shifting, probably during an early winter freeze-thaw cycle, and rather than abandon it, someone worked with the tilt. The sleeping platform's adjustment is just the most obvious change. Looking closer, you notice small wooden wedges placed under furniture legs, shelves mounted at odd angles to remain level despite the slanting walls. Even the fire pit has been repositioned to prevent ash from rolling toward the door. You sit on the angled sleeping platform and feel how your body wants to slide toward the lower end. Ropes have been attached to the upper side, probably so sleepers could hold themselves in place throughout the night. You grasp one of these ropes and understand immediately how exhausting sleep here would have been. You couldn't simply relax. You'd need to maintain some muscle tension all night to avoid rolling off the platform. A practical observation from settlement records enters your thoughts. Many frontier cabins experience structural problems within their first few winters. Inadequate foundations, green wood that warped as it dried, frost heave that shifted everything. The list of potential failures was extensive. Families faced a choice: abandon the shelter and start over, or adapt to the imperfection and survive anyway. This tilted cabin represents choosing survival over idealism. You stand and walk carefully to the upper end of the cabin where items have been stored in a corner. Several bags hang from hooks positioned high to prevent them from sliding down the slope. You recognize this as food storage, elevated to discourage mice and positioned to work with gravity rather than against it. Inside the bags you find dried goods, beans, corn, some kind of grain you can't immediately identify. These provisions would have been carefully rationed throughout winter, calculated to last until spring thaw made foraging possible again. One bag contains something unexpected: acorns, processed and shelled, ready for grinding into flour. You lift a handful and feel their weight. Native peoples taught some settlers how to leach the bitterness from acorns and use them as a food source when wheat flour became unavailable. This knowledge transfer likely saved lives during harsh winters when traditional supplies ran short. A small, charming detail from oral histories comes to mind. Children sometimes played games with acorns during winter months, rolling them down slanted cabin floors and betting which would reach the door first. Even in tilted, uncomfortable shelters, young minds found ways to create entertainment from adversity. You replace the acorns carefully and make your way back toward the door. As you lift it open, a thought settles over you. Perfection was never the goal in frontier survival. Adequacy was enough. Good enough to survive another night, another week, another winter. The tilted cabin stands as testament to that pragmatic philosophy. Outside, you notice the storm's rhythm has changed. The wind no longer howls continuously but comes in waves. Intense gusts followed by brief calm periods. During one of these calms, you make good progress toward the next shelter, your boots finding easier purchase in snow that's beginning to crust over. This cabin appears more recently built than the others, its logs still showing yellow where bark has been stripped away. The door fits snugly in its frame. You have to work the latch carefully to open it. Inside, the air smells of fresh wood and something else. Paint? No, not paint. Some kind of sealant or protective coating applied to the interior walls. You run your hand along the wall and feel a waxy residue. animal fat, you realize. Someone rendered tallow and spread it across the interior surfaces, creating a moisture barrier that would help prevent rot and also provide slight insulation. It's a labor-intensive process, but demonstrates forward thinking. This cabin was built not just for immediate survival, but with an eye toward the lasting multiple seasons. The sleeping platform here is the most sophisticated you've encountered so far. It's built with a frame that creates a box-like structure, and the sides are filled with dried grass insulation. The bedding sits atop this insulated box, separated from the cold floor by layers of trapped air. You press down on the mattress and feel real softness. This is stuffed with something beyond straw, feathers perhaps, or cattail down collected in massive quantities. A historical fact emerges in your thoughts. Settlers who survived their first brutal winter often spent the following spring and summer improving their shelters obsessively. They'd experienced the cost of inadequate preparation and became determined never to endure that suffering again. This cabin represents that second-year wisdom, built by someone who understood exactly what winter would demand. You sit on the well-made bed and let yourself sink into it slightly. For the first time in your journey, you can imagine actually sleeping with some comfort. The platform doesn't shift or creak. The insulation underneath prevents cold from seeping upward. The bedding itself offers real cushioning. It's still primitive by modern standards, but compared to the other shelters you've visited, this feels almost luxurious. On a shelf near the bed, you notice several candles, real wax candles, not just rushlights or tallow smears. These would have been precious, used sparingly for important tasks or special occasions. Their presence speaks to either relative prosperity or careful trading. You pick one up and smell it. Beeswax. Someone kept bees or traded with someone who did, and they valued light enough to invest in quality illumination. Before leaving, you spot something tucked into a corner, a child's toy, a wooden horse, roughly carved but recognizable, with a leather strap for pulling it across the floor. You pick it up gently, running your thumb over the worn edges. This object carries more emotional weight than anything else you've encountered. It speaks to hope, to family, to the belief that children deserved moments of joy even in the hardest seasons. You set the toy back carefully, exactly as you found it, and walk toward the door. This cabin feels different as you leave it. Less like witnessing hardship and more like glimpsing success. Someone made it work. Someone built a life, not just survival, in this frozen landscape. The storm greets you again, but you're different now too. You've seen the progression from desperate improvisation to thoughtful construction. You understand that survival wasn't static. It evolved, improved, became less about endurance and more about actually living. That knowledge warms you slightly as you continue forward. Your next destination takes longer to reach. The path has disappeared entirely under fresh snow, and you navigate by dead reckoning, hoping you're moving in the right general direction. When a structure finally appears, you feel genuine relief. Your energy is flagging now, the cold working its way deeper despite your layers. This cabin is built into the side of a small hill, with earth piled against 3 walls. Only the front face stands fully exposed. You recognize this design, a dugout, or semi-dugout, using the earth itself as insulation. These structures were common in regions where timber was scarce, or where settlers needed shelter immediately and couldn't invest time in elaborate construction. You enter through the exposed wall and immediately feel the difference. The temperature inside is noticeably higher than in the freestanding cabins. Earth is an excellent insulator, maintaining more consistent temperature than air-exposed walls ever could. You walk deeper into the space and notice the ceiling is low, barely 6 feet, which also helps. Less air volume means easier heating and less warmth lost to empty space above. The sleeping area is built directly against one of the earth walls. You touch the wall and find it cold but not freezing. And importantly, it's dry. Moisture management would have been crucial in dugouts. Any water seeping through the earth could create dangerous conditions. Someone carefully selected this site, choosing a location with good drainage and stable soil. You sit on the sleeping platform and let yourself relax against the earth wall. There's something deeply primal about this shelter, something that connects to humanity's earliest dwelling forms. Caves protected our distant ancestors. This dugout represents the same instinct, letting the earth itself provide shelter. A detail from architectural history comes to mind. Dugout homes were sometimes dismissed as primitive or temporary, but some families lived in them for years, even decades, finding them more comfortable than conventional cabins. The consistent temperature, protection from wind, and reduced fuel needs made them practical despite their unconventional appearance. This dugout shows signs of long-term occupation. The floor is worn smooth, shelves have been carved into the earth walls, hooks and pegs are positioned thoughtfully throughout. Standing again, you notice something peculiar. The air smells faintly sweet, almost pleasant. You trace the scent to bundles of dried grass hanging from the ceiling. Not just any grass, prairie grass known for its vanilla-like scent when dried. Someone gathered this specifically to make their underground home smell less like earth and more like the open prairies above. An unusual detail from settler letters surfaces. One woman wrote about growing herbs in containers near the entrance of her dugout, claiming the plants thrived in the stable temperature and made her earth home feel more cheerful during grey winter months. Whether the herbs actually survived, or this was wishful memory, the desire to beautify even the most basic shelter speaks to enduring human nature. You move toward the exit, pausing to appreciate the dugout's simple effectiveness one final time. Then you step back into the storm, which now feels even harsher after the earth-sheltered calm. The landscape has transformed as you've journeyed. The individual cabins and shelters now blur together in your memory, each one contributing to a larger understanding of frontier winter survival. You're not just observing anymore, you're integrating these lessons, feeling how they compound into wisdom. Ahead, you spot what will be your final shelter. Something in the quality of light, or perhaps just intuition, tells you this marks the end of your journey through the frozen night. The structure stands alone on a slight rise, its chimney, a real chimney properly built, rising against the white sky. You approach slowly, almost reluctantly. Part of you wants to continue discovering, learning, bearing witness to these stories of endurance. But your body reminds you of its limits. The cold has penetrated deep now. Your movements have slowed. It's time for this journey to complete its arc. The door opens easily, and you step into a space that feels immediately different from all the others. This is a home, not just shelter. The distinction is subtle but unmistakable. Someone has lived here long enough to move beyond survival into something approaching comfort. The sleeping area dominates one wall, a proper bed frame with rope supports creating a suspended mattress surface. Multiple quilts are layered on top, each one showing skilled needlework and careful color choices. These weren't made in desperate haste, but crafted over many evenings. Patterns selected, stitches placed with attention to beauty as well as function. You sit on the bed and feel its give and support. Someone understood mattress construction, knew how to tension ropes for optimal comfort, selected materials that would maintain their shape over time. You lie back experimentally and feel yourself cradled rather than merely supported. After the primitive sleeping platforms you've encountered, this feels remarkable. The fireplace holds cold ashes, but its construction is sound. The chimney draws properly. You can feel the slight updraft even without fire. The hearth is lined with flat stones carefully selected and fitted. Fire tools hang on hooks nearby, well maintained and positioned for easy access. This fireplace represents accumulated knowledge, probably multiple winters of learning what worked and what didn't. Around the room, small details accumulate into a picture of sustained habitation. Shelves hold not just necessities but a few decorative items. A pottery vase, a carved wooden box, a small mirror in a simple frame. These objects serve no survival purpose, which makes them all the more significant. Someone had enough security to think about aesthetics, enough confidence in their shelter to invest in making it pleasant. You stand and walk to the window. Real glass fills the frame, expensive, difficult to transport, but providing light and visibility that oiled paper or shutters never could. Through it, you can see the storm continuing outside, but from here it looks different, less threatening, more like weather happening to the world while you remain safe inside. A thought from frontier research settles over you. Scholars debate how long it took for settlers to transition from survival mode to actually building lives. Some say a single winter of success was enough to transform mindset. Others argue it required years. Standing in this cabin, you sense the answer varies by person. Some never escaped the survival mentality. Others, like whoever built this home, found ways to thrive despite ongoing challenges. You return to the bed and sit once more, feeling the exhaustion of your journey settling into your bones. This is the right place to end, not in the most desperate shelter, but in one that demonstrates what was possible when knowledge, effort, and fortune aligned. You lie back on the comfortable bed and let your eyes close briefly. The quilts smell faintly of lavender. Someone stored them with dried flowers between seasons. Your breathing slows naturally, your body finally allowing itself to relax after the long, cold journey. Outside, you sense the storm beginning to ease. Perhaps morning is approaching. Perhaps the worst has passed. You let these thoughts drift through your mind without grasping them too tightly. The journey has taught you about endurance, ingenuity, adaptation, and hope. It's shown you how humans face impossible odds and find ways forward. Your shoulders sink deeper into the mattress. The cold that's been your companion throughout this experience gradually loosens its grip on your imagination. You picture Picture the settlers who slept in these cabins waking to calmer weather, stepping outside to clear snow, beginning another day of building their lives in a land that demanded everything they had to give. You breathe deeply, slowly, letting the rhythm carry you toward rest. The cabins fade from your mind one by one. The tilted shelter, the dugout, the communal space, the tiny suspended platform. Each one contributed something to your understanding, and now they can release you gently into sleep. Your last conscious thought is simple. They endured. Through impossible, cold, inadequate shelter and endless winter nights, they endured. And in their endurance, they created something worth remembering. Your breathing deepens further. The storm outside becomes distant, then silent. The frozen world softens at its edges, warmth spreading slowly from your center outward. You let yourself drift, carried by the quiet knowledge that survival is possible, even when circumstances seem impossible. Sleep approaches like the gradual thaw of spring, inevitable, gentle, welcome. You surrender to it without resistance, trusting that when you wake, the world will have softened slightly. The long winter night is ending. Rest has been earned. Your thoughts scatter like snowflakes in wind, impossible to hold or follow. The bed cradles you. The quilts hold you. The shelter protects you. And finally, mercifully, you sleep. The journey through frozen time completes itself. The cabins stand silent in your memory, testimony to human resilience. And you rest within that knowledge, warm at last, safe at last, letting the winter night carry you gently toward dreams of spring. Until next time, sleep well, my peaceful travelers.